"Dad, I need you to sign these papers today," my daughter Emma said, pushing a folder across the kitchen table with an urgency that made me frown. It was 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, and she never showed up this early without warning. Her husband Jake stood next to her, avoiding my gaze as he nervously fiddled with his cell phone. My wife Lisa stood near the sink, her back too tense for someone who should be making coffee. "What are these papers?" I asked, opening the folder. "Divorce papers," Emma replied quickly. "To speed up the process between you and Mom. Jake knows a lawyer who can finalize everything in 2 weeks if you agree to the proposed division of assets. My name is Chris, I'm 62 years old, and I just realized that my own family was conspiring to rob me. During 38 years of marriage, I built a construction company worth millions. The house we were sitting in? I designed and built it myself with my own hands 25 years ago. The 5 acres of land overlooking the lake? I bought it when Emma was still in diapers. And now they wanted me to sign papers that would leave me with just a small apartment and a generous monthly allowance of $3,000. Why the rush?" I asked calmly, leafing through the papers. "Lisa and I agreed to do this in a civilized manner." Jake finally spoke, his voice tense. "It's just that, well, you know how these things can get complicated if they drag on. It's better to get it over with." Interesting. My son-in-law, who had been working as a real estate agent for only 5 years, was giving me advice on complex legal matters. That's when I noticed something I should have noticed before. Lisa's wedding ring wasn't on her finger. Emma was wearing a new, expensive perfume. And Jake had a tan line on his wrist where he used to wear the watch Emma gave him for their anniversary. The same watch I saw on my dresser last night. "You know," I said slowly, closing the folder, 40 years in construction has taught me one important thing. When someone wants you to sign something in a hurry, it's because they have something to hide." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa finally turned around, her face pale. Emma started talking quickly about legal procedures and deadlines. Jake continued to avoid my gaze. But I already knew the truth. The signs had been there for months. Lisa's mysterious outings. Jake's frequent visits when Emma was working. The whispering that stopped when I entered the room. My wife was sleeping with my son-in-law, and they thought I was too stupid to notice. "All right," I finally said, picking up a pen. "But I want my lawyer to look over everything first. How about we meet on Thursday?" The relief on their faces was almost comical. They thought they had won. If you're enjoying this story of betrayal and are curious to find out how I'm going to handle this situation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What they didn't know was that I had already started my own investigation 2 weeks ago. And what I discovered would make this little family meeting seem like a picnic compared to the hurricane that was about to descend on their lives. After they left, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the folder of papers. 38 years of marriage reduced to a cold division of material possessions. But it wasn't the unfair division that bothered me. It was the systematic betrayal that had been going on under my own roof. Lisa came home 2 hours later, carrying expensive shopping bags. Stores she never used to go to. "How was your meeting with Emma?" I asked casually, watching her every reaction. "What meeting?" she replied too quickly, her cheeks flushing slightly. "She was here this morning with Jake. They brought the divorce papers." Lisa stopped unpacking the groceries, her hands shaking almost imperceptibly. "Oh yes. I forgot you mentioned that." That was a lie. Emma had told me they had talked about it yesterday. Jake seemed nervous, I continued, testing her. He could barely look me in the eye. "You know how shy he is," Lisa muttered, avoiding my gaze as well. Shy. Jake, who sold a $2 million house to a difficult client last month, was shy. That night, while Lisa took a longer than usual shower, another sign I'd ignored for months, I mentally reviewed the last 6 months. The changes started subtly. Lisa, who had always been a homebody, started going out for girlfriends' nights on Wednesdays. Always Wednesdays, always from 2 to 5 p.m. exactly when Jake was supposed to be showing houses, according to his schedule that Emma occasionally mentioned. Then came the new clothes. Expensive lingerie she never wore with me. Different perfumes. A sudden gym membership at 58. And Jake. My son-in-law, whom I had helped establish in real estate, whom I treated like the son I never had. He started showing up at the house more often when Emma was working. Always with elaborate excuses, He wanted advice on investments, needed to use my printer, was just stopping by. The printer that sits in my office, next to the master bedroom. 3 weeks ago, I discreetly installed security cameras on the property. Officially to protect the construction equipment I keep in the shed. In reality, to confirm what my heart already knew. The recordings were devastating. Lisa and Jake meeting at my own home while I was at work. Kissing in my garden. Using my pool. Laughing at how easy it was to fool me. In one particularly painful recording, I heard Jake say, "He's getting old and suspicious. We need to speed up the divorce." And Lisa responding, "Don't worry. He's always been naive. He'll sign anything if we tell him it's for the good of the family." Naive. After building an empire from scratch, surviving 3 economic recessions, creating jobs for hundreds of people, my own wife considered me naive. Their plan was simple and cruel. Jake would convince Emma that divorce was inevitable and best for everyone. Lisa would pretend she also wanted to end the marriage amicably. I would sign the papers without question, lose most of my assets, and they could be together without the embarrassment of a scandalous public divorce. Emma didn't even know about the betrayal. My daughter was being manipulated by her own husband to help destroy her family. The following Wednesday, I discreetly followed Lisa. She went to the apartment Jake kept downtown, supposedly for clients visiting from out of town. They were there for 3 hours. When I got home, I found a message from Emma on my cell phone. "Dad, Jake said you agreed to sign the papers Thursday. Is that true?" My own daughter was checking with me via text message, too nervous to call directly. I took a deep breath and typed back, "It's true. Let's get this over with." But what neither of them knew was that while they were planning my financial ruin, I had spent the last 2 weeks building something much more elaborate. 40 years in construction had taught me that before you tear down a structure, you need to understand exactly where the supporting pillars are. And I had just located every pillar of the life Jake and Lisa had built together. Thursday's meeting would be unforgettable. But not for the reasons they imagined. Thursday dawned with a light rain that seemed to reflect my state of mind. 40 years of building a life, a family, a legacy, and it was all falling apart because of the greed and lust of 2 people I loved. But the betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. On Wednesday night, after confirming that Lisa had been at Jake's apartment for 3 hours, I returned home and did something I never thought I would do. I reviewed all of our financial documents from the past 2 years. What I found made me sick. Unexplained withdrawals from our savings account. $20,000 in March. $15,000 in June. $12,000 in September. Always on Wednesdays, always when I was supervising construction work at distant job sites. Lisa had stolen $47,000 from me. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was finding out where the money had gone. Jake was in serious financial trouble. His real estate office was going under, he was 3 months behind on rent, and the bank was threatening to foreclose on his and Emma's house. My wife was supporting my son-in-law's double life with my own money. Emma had no idea. My daughter thought her husband was a successful broker, when in fact he was a parasite living off the family he had betrayed. On Thursday morning, as I was getting ready for my meeting at the lawyer's office, I received an unexpected call. "Dad." Emma's voice was shaky. "Can I talk to you before the meeting?" "Of course, honey. Where are you?" "At my house. Alone." Jake left early, said he had an important meeting before we were supposed to meet. Interesting. Jake had lied to Emma too. Our meeting was at 10 in the morning, and it was already past 8:30. I arrived at Emma's house 20 minutes later and found my daughter sitting in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her eyes red from crying. "Emma, what happened?" She showed me her phone. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. "Your mother and her husband have been seeing each other for months. I thought you should know. A concerned friend." My heart broke when I saw the pain on my daughter's face. Emma had found out in the worst possible way. "Dad, is this true?" she asked, her voice breaking. I could have lied. I could have protected my daughter from the cruel truth for a few more hours. But she deserved honesty. "It's true, sweetheart." Emma collapsed into tears. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. "And you didn't tell me?" I sat down next to her and held her hands. "I wanted to protect you. And I wanted to be absolutely sure before I destroyed your life with this information." My life is already destroyed, she cried, pulling away from me. My husband is sleeping with my mother. How is that protection? She was right. My attempt to spare my daughter had only prolonged her pain. Emma, there's more you need to know. For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. The security cameras. The recordings. The stolen money. Jake's financial problems. Their plan to manipulate me in the divorce. When I was done, Emma was in complete shock. They planned all of this, she whispered. Jake married me to get access to our family. To steal from us. It sure looks that way. Emma stood up abruptly, her sadness turning to anger. No. This isn't going to happen. We're not going to let them win. It was at that moment that I made my final decision. Emma, I have a plan. But it will require you to be very strong and do exactly what I say. Anything, Dad. Anything to stop those two. I explained my plan. It was risky, depended on perfect timing, and would require Emma to pretend she knew nothing for a few more hours. But if it worked, Jake and Lisa wouldn't just lose everything, they'd face serious legal consequences. Can you do this? I asked when I finished. Emma wiped her eyes and stood up straight. I can. But Dad, are you sure this will work? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a happy smile, but one of cold determination. Honey, 40 years in construction have taught me that when you want to tear down a corrupt structure, you don't just attack the walls. You have to blow up the foundation. At 9:45, Emma and I arrived at the lawyer's office. Jake was already there, nervous and checking his cell phone constantly. Lisa arrived 5 minutes later, pretending she had just come from a doctor's appointment. Neither of them suspected that their victims had become allies. When Jake's lawyer began explaining the papers for the second time, assuring us that everything was standard and fair to all parties involved, I made eye contact with Emma. She nodded almost imperceptibly. It was time to show Jake and Lisa that 40 years of building empires also teaches you how to tear them down spectacularly. What they didn't know was that while they were planning to rob me at a lawyer's desk, I had already handed copies of all the evidence to the FBI the previous morning. Stealing from a spouse during a divorce is civil. But embezzling money through bank accounts to fund fraudulent activities? That's a federal crime. And Jake had made that exact mistake when he used Lisa's money to forge non-existent sales documents, artificially inflating his income to secure loans he never intended to repay. The meeting was about to get a lot more interesting than either of them had anticipated. Jake's lawyer, a thin man named Peterson, began explaining the terms of the divorce with the confidence of someone who believed he was dealing with a broken and desperate man. As you can see, Mr. Morrison, this division is extremely generous considering the circumstances, he said, pointing to numbers on page 3. You'll keep the apartment downtown, receive $3,000 a month, and be entitled to 20% of the company's profits for the next 5 years. Jake was visibly relaxed, checking messages on his cell phone. Lisa pretended to study the documents, but I could see the barely concealed smile on her lips. They really thought they had me completely fooled. What about the house? I asked, feigning concern. Ah yes, Peterson continued smoothly. Due to the company's current financial complications and need for liquidity, it will be necessary to sell the main property. Mr. Morrison will receive 15% of the net proceeds after the sale. 15% of the house I had built with my own hands. The house where I raised my daughter. Where I buried 3 dogs in the backyard. Where I spent 40 years of my life. Emma made a strangled noise, as if trying not to cry. Her performance was perfect. Dad, are you sure about this? She asked, her voice trembling. This house means so much to our family. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good, Lisa said with false compassion. Your father understands that this is the mature thing to do. Mature. The woman who was sleeping with her son-in-law was calling decisions mature. Where are you going to live? I asked Jake directly, watching his reaction. Well, Jake hesitated for a moment, exchanging a quick glance with Lisa. Emma and I are thinking about moving to something smaller. More practical for the two of us. Lies. Based on the messages I had intercepted, Jake and Lisa had already visited 3 luxury homes last week, all with lake views, all costing over $1 million. And you, Lisa? I asked my wife. Where do you plan to live after the divorce? Lisa blushed slightly. I'm still deciding. Maybe a quiet apartment. Something to start over. Start over. With my son-in-law, using my money, after stealing from me for 2 years. Well, I finally said, I suppose you've thought of everything. Peterson smiled triumphantly. We tried to be as fair as possible, considering the situation. The situation. As if I were to blame for the end of my marriage. I took the pen Peterson offered me and looked at the papers. For a moment, I let the silence linger. I could feel the tension building in the room. Jake had stopped fiddling with his phone. Lisa was holding her breath. You know, I said calmly, 40 years in construction has taught me something interesting about foundations. Dad? Emma asked, following my script. A building can look solid on the outside, but if the foundation is cracked, sooner or later it will collapse. And when it collapses, it's not gradual. It's catastrophic. Jake frowned. I don't see where you're going with this. I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm saying that before I sign anything, I'd like to clarify a few things about the foundations of this proposal. I put the pen down on the table and opened my own briefcase, which I had brought discreetly. For example, I continued, pulling out a stack of bank statements, I'd like to understand these unauthorized withdrawals of $47,000 from our joint savings account, Lisa. The blood drained from my wife's face. Jake sat up straight in his chair as if he had been shocked. Chris, I can explain, Lisa began. I'm sure you can. Especially since I explained to Special Agent Martinez of the FBI how these withdrawals coincided exactly with the deposits into Jake's business account. Peterson dropped the papers as if they were on fire. Mr. Morrison, if there are criminal issues involved. Oh, there are plenty of criminal issues, I confirmed calmly. Jake, did you know that using money obtained through marital fraud to forge real estate sales documents is a federal crime? Jake was pale as a ghost. I didn't forge anything. No. I pulled another document from the folder. Because here's a copy of the statement you submitted to First National Bank, claiming to have sold the Elm Street property for $350,000 in August. A property that, according to city records, was demolished in June. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma feigned perfect surprise, putting her hand to her mouth. And Lisa, I continued, turning to my wife, did you really think I wouldn't find out about the apartment you rented together downtown? The one you financed with money from our account. Lisa began to cry, but not tears of regret. They were tears of anger and frustration at being caught. You followed us, she accused. You violated our privacy. I violated your privacy? My voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. You slept with my son-in-law in my own home for 8 months, stole nearly $50,000 from our savings, and I violated your privacy? Jake was trying to get up, but Peterson held him back by the arm. Mr. Morrison, the lawyer said nervously, perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. Oh no, I interrupted. Let's get this over with now. Because we haven't gotten to the best part yet. I took the last document out of the folder. A deed. The original deed to my house. You see, there's something about my property that none of you bothered to check. The house isn't just in my name. It's in a family trust established by my grandfather in 1952. Peterson took the document with trembling hands. A trust, I continued, that specifically protects the property from division in the event of divorce due to adultery. Lisa never had any legal claim to this house. And Jake, I looked directly at him, you never will. This is the point where many channels would lose their viewers, but if you've stayed this far, it's because you understand that the best revenge is served cold and with surgical precision. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. That's impossible, Jake muttered. We checked. Peterson checked. Peterson checked the current public records, I explained patiently. Family trusts from 1952 are filed in a completely different section. A section I know very well, considering my grandfather took me there personally when I was 16 to explain exactly how to protect our land. The reality was beginning to sink in for all of them. The $1.5 million house they were already mentally decorating would never be theirs. The $500,000 they expected from the sale never existed. But that's not all, I continued, savoring every word. Because when the FBI finishes investigating your financial schemes, Jake, you won't just lose your real estate license. You'll face federal charges of bank fraud, document forgery, and money laundering. Jake was breathing heavily, as if he were having a panic attack. And Lisa, I turned to my wife of 38 years, marital theft over $10,000 is a felony. You could face up to 5 years in prison. Emma chose that moment to make her triumphant entrance in our little play. Dad, she said, her voice still shaky, there's something I need to tell everyone. Lisa and Jake turned to her, hoping perhaps for some support. I've known about your affair for 2 weeks. Sage, my old best friend from high school, told me. She saw you two together at the cafe on 5th Avenue. The layers of betrayal were being revealed. Jake had been discovered not only by his father-in-law, but by his own wife. Emma, Jake pleaded, I can explain everything. You can explain how you slept with your wife's mother? Emma replied, her voice gaining strength. How you planned to steal my father. How you made me believe you were a faithful husband while you destroyed our family. The plan was working perfectly. Every domino was falling exactly where I had predicted. 40 years of building complex structures had taught me that the secret isn't brute force, but precision. You identify the points of tension, apply pressure in the right places, and watch the inevitable collapse. Jake and Lisa had built their conspiracy on weak foundations. Lies, theft, betrayal. No structure can hold real weight for long when it's built on those foundations. Peterson was frantically gathering his papers. Gentlemen, I think it would be best to suspend this meeting until all parties have sought appropriate legal representation. Of course, I agreed amiably. Jake, you're going to need a criminal lawyer. Lisa, you too. And Peterson, well, you might want to review your document verification practices before taking on cases like this in the future. As they hurried out of the room, Jake supporting Lisa, who was sobbing, Peterson muttering about unforeseen complications, Emma and I remained seated calmly. Dad, she said when we were alone, what happens now? Now, I replied, we watch a poorly constructed structure collapse completely. And then we build something new and better on the rubble. But the best was yet to come. Because Jake and Lisa didn't yet know about the conversation I'd had with Jake's supervisor at the real estate agency. Nor did they know about the clients I discreetly warned about questionable practices. And they definitely didn't know about the meeting I'd scheduled for the next morning with the district attorney. 40 years in construction had taught me that demolition is only the first step. The real work begins when you have to build something new in place of what was destroyed. And I was just beginning to show Jake and Lisa what an experienced builder can do when he decides to start from scratch. 2 hours after the disaster at Peterson's office, I was in my living room when I heard tires screeching in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Jake's car pull up abruptly, followed by Lisa's Mercedes. They stormed out of their vehicles, Jake slamming his door so hard that the noise echoed across the property. Lisa was visibly upset, her hair disheveled, her makeup smudged. Emma, who had been with me since the disastrous meeting, looked out the window and sighed. They're here to fight, she said calmly. Let them come, I replied. 40 years of building houses has taught me that when a structure is collapsing, you don't try to hold it together. You get out of the way and let gravity do its work. Jake began pounding on the front door with his fists, like a man possessed. Chris, open that door right now. You can't do this to us. Lisa was screaming too, you ruined everything. 40 years of marriage, and this is how it ends? With you sabotaging us. I opened the door calmly, keeping my posture relaxed as I faced two faces contorted with anger and despair. Hello, Lisa. Jake. I figured you'd come. You destroyed our life. Jake lunged at me but stopped when he saw Emma appear behind me, filming everything with her cell phone. Our life? I asked with genuine curiosity. You built a life based on theft, lies, and betrayal. I just brought the truth to light. Lisa was shaking with rage. You followed us. You violated our privacy. How could you be so cruel? Cruel? The word came out of my mouth, tasting bitter. Lisa, you slept with our daughter's husband for 8 months. You stole almost $50,000 from our savings. And I'm cruel for finding out. We could have handled this civilly, she shouted. We could have gotten a normal divorce. Normal. Jake laughed hysterically. He ruined my career. Peterson said he could be disbarred for not checking documents properly. And the FBI, My God, the FBI is going to investigate me. It was then that I noticed something interesting in Jake's eyes. It wasn't just anger or despair. It was pure panic. The kind of panic that sets in when someone realizes they've made mistakes far bigger than they ever imagined. "Jake," I said calmly, "tell me something. When you used the money Lisa stole to cover your gambling debts, did you really think no one would notice?" The silence was deafening. Lisa turned to Jake, confusion replacing anger on her face. "What gambling debts?" Jake was as pale as a sheet. "Chris, how did I find out about the Riverboat Casino where you lost $73,000 in the last 6 months? How did I find out that you used forged documents to get loans to cover those losses? Jake, did you really think I wouldn't do a thorough investigation before taking any action?" Lisa was staring at Jake with growing horror. "You told me you needed the money to invest in the company. You told me we were going to buy a house together." "Lisa," Jake tried to speak, but I interrupted him. "Oh, but there's more. Jake, do you want to tell Lisa about Melissa? The 22-year-old waitress at the casino you've also been seeing? Or should I show her the photos?" Lisa's world collapsed for the second time in one day. She turned to Jake with a fury that made her previous anger seem like a whisper. "You were cheating on me too?" "Lisa, I can explain." "Explain what?" she screamed. "That you used our entire family as pawns in your pathetic game? That I destroyed my marriage for someone who was cheating on me too?" Emma continued filming everything, her expression a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. My daughter was seeing Jake for who he really was for the first time. That's when I heard the sound of cars approaching on the driveway. 3 black vehicles with government license plates pulled up in front of the house. "Ah," I said casually, "I guess that's the FBI agents." Jake tried to run, but tripped over his own feet, falling onto the front lawn. Lisa stood frozen, watching the agents get out of their cars wearing bulletproof vests. "Jacob Ryan Sullivan?" asked the lead agent, a tall, bald man with sunglasses. "No. This is a misunderstanding," Jake stammered from the ground. "Mr. Sullivan, you are under arrest for bank fraud, falsification of federal documents, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." As they cuffed Jake, the agent turned to Lisa. "Ms. Morrison, we'll also need you to accompany us for questioning about the suspicious bank transactions." Lisa looked at me with an expression that mixed hatred, despair, and a silent plea for help. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for the woman I had shared 38 years of my life with. Almost. "Chris," she whispered as the second agent approached, "please. There's something you can do." "There is, actually," I replied calmly. "I can give her the same advice you gave me this morning. Sometimes we have to accept the consequences of our choices." As they led Lisa and Jake away, Emma lowered her cell phone and turned to me. "Dad, how did you know about the casino? About Melissa?" I smiled for the first time in weeks with genuine satisfaction. "Emma, when you suspect someone is stealing from you, you don't just hire a private investigator. You hire the best. And when you have 40 years of connections in the construction industry, you know people who know people in very interesting places. You planned all this." "I didn't plan for them to be so stupid," I admitted. "I planned to find out the truth and protect our family. The rest was just a natural consequence of their choices." Emma hugged me tightly, and for the first time in months, I felt like my family was truly safe. But the story wasn't over. As we watched the FBI cars drive away, my cell phone rang. It was Peterson, Jake's lawyer. "Chris," his voice was shaky, "we need to talk. There are some things about the case that may affect you as well." I hung up the phone and looked at Emma. "What's wrong, Dad?" It seems Jake was more desperate than I realized. And desperate men do very dangerous things. Emma frowned. "Like what?" I thought about the 3 life insurance policies my investigator had found in Jake's desk drawer. All in my name. All signed by Jake as the beneficiary using forged documents. "The kind of thing that turns theft into something much more serious," I replied grimly. Revenge had been sweet, but I was beginning to realize that Jake and Lisa weren't just thieves and traitors. They might also have been much more dangerous than I ever imagined. And if I was right about those insurance policies, our little family drama was about to turn into a murder investigation. Peterson's call had been just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the FBI investigation revealed a conspiracy far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. The 3 life insurance policies in my name, each worth $500,000, had been purchased by Jake over an 18-month period. He had forged my signature using a technique he had learned online, always paying the premiums in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. But most shocking were the files found on Jake's personal computer. Mr. Morrison, Agent Martinez explained during our meeting at the FBI office, we found extensive research on construction accidents, methods for sabotaging equipment, construction site fatality statistics, and even a detailed schedule of his projects for the next 6 months. Emma sat beside me, pale as a sheet. He was really going to try to kill Dad? The evidence strongly suggests that, Martinez confirmed. We also found messages between Jake and Lisa discussing taking care of the Chris problem after the divorce didn't go as planned. Lisa had tried to play the victim, claiming that Jake had manipulated her, but the audio recordings my investigator had captured told a different story. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was the co-architect of the plan. In one particularly damning recording, I heard Lisa say, "With Chris out of the way, Emma will inherit everything. And with you being the widowed and grieving son-in-law, no one will question you helping to manage her assets until she recovers from the trauma." They had planned not only to kill me, but to traumatize my daughter to steal her inheritance as well. The trial was a spectacle. Jake tried to plead temporary insanity, then switched to Lisa's coercion, and finally attempted a plea bargain. Nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulously documented, impossible to refute. Lisa, for her part, maintained her story that she was an unhappy wife manipulated by a younger man. The jury didn't buy it. Not after hearing the recordings where she suggested specific methods for construction accidents. During my testimony, I looked directly at Jake. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 6 months. The arrogant man who had challenged me in my own home now stood hunched over, defeated, finally realizing the consequences of underestimating someone with 40 years of experience building and demolishing complex structures. "Mr. Morrison," the prosecutor asked, "how do you feel knowing that people you trusted planned not only to steal your property, but to take your life?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I feel sadness. Not anger, not hatred, but a deep sadness for 2 people who chose to destroy everything they touched. They had families who loved them, the resources to build a good life, and they chose the path of betrayal and violence." Jake received 25 years for attempted premeditated murder, bank fraud, and a host of other crimes. Lisa got 15 years as an accomplice. Peterson lost his license and faced charges of criminal negligence for failing to verify forged documents. The most satisfying part wasn't seeing my enemies punished, but watching how the truth had freed all the innocent people involved. Emma blossomed after the divorce. Without Jake sucking her energy and confidence, my daughter rediscovered her strength and independence. She decided to go back to school, get a master's degree in psychology, with a focus on helping victims of family manipulation. "Dad," she told me 6 months after the trial, "thank you for showing me that being strong doesn't mean being cruel. You could have let me find out everything in the most painful way possible, but you chose to protect me while fighting for justice." Our relationship, which Jake had tried to destroy with his manipulation, came out stronger than ever. Sage, the woman who had warned Emma about the affair, became a constant presence in our lives. Initially as Emma's friend, but gradually I realized there was something special about her. At 52, she was a retired nurse, widowed for 3 years, with a gentle wisdom and a sense of humor that made me laugh out loud for the first time in years. "Chris," she said to me during a dinner that Emma had coincidentally arranged, "you are a man who has built his entire life on solid foundations. That's attractive in someone our age." It wasn't young passion, but something deeper: companionship, mutual respect, the tranquility of 2 people who knew the value of honesty. A year after the trial, Sage and I were married in a simple ceremony in my backyard. Emma was my witness. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was building something new on truly solid foundations. People ask me how I managed to stay calm throughout the ordeal, how I didn't lose my mind when I discovered the extent of the betrayal. The answer is simple: 40 years of building houses has taught me that when a structure is compromised, you don't waste time lamenting. You assess the damage, save what can be saved, and rebuild better than before. Jake and Lisa thought they were dealing with an old naive man who was easy to deceive and manipulate. They didn't realize that experience is not synonymous with weakness. That someone who built an empire from scratch has resources that arrogant young people can't even imagine. If you've made it this far in this story of overcoming adversity and justice, subscribe to the channel. We have many other stories that show how it's never too late to fight for what's right. 3 years later, I drive through the city where I've lived my entire adult life. The construction company is thriving under new management, with Emma as a partner. The house where I suffered so many betrayals now echoes with the laughter of Sage and the grandchildren Emma plans to give us soon. Jake writes letters from prison occasionally, asking for forgiveness, claiming he has found religion. I don't respond. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and some lessons are best learned in the silence of forced reflection. Lisa, I've learned through legal sources, is serving her sentence in a federal prison in Arizona. According to reports, she still insists she is a victim of circumstance, unable to accept responsibility for her choices. Sometimes, when I'm supervising new construction, I watch the foundation being laid and think about foundations, not just for houses, but for lives. Jake and Lisa built their ambitions on lies, theft, and eventual violence. When the pressure came, it all collapsed. Sage and I have built our new life on honesty, respect, and the wisdom that comes from having survived life's storms. Our foundation may not be spectacular, but it's solid. It will withstand any storm. Last week, a young real estate agent came to me for advice on doing business with older clients. There was something in his eyes, a familiar arrogance, that reminded me of Jake. "Young man," I said calmly, "I'll give you just one piece of advice. Never underestimate someone because of their age. Experience isn't weakness. It's a sharp tool in the right hands." He laughed, as if I were a senile old man giving obsolete advice. I smiled back and handed him my card. "When you need someone to build your first house, come see me. 40 years of experience guarantee that she'll have foundations that will last forever." What he didn't know, and Jake and Lisa learned too late, is that some people don't get weaker with age. They get more dangerous.